Good afternoon, everyone watching us in India, and greetings of the day for the delegates who are watching us all across the globe. I'm Latika, Associate Vice President at IMEI, and it gives me immense pleasure to let you know some data crunching which we've done in the last one day. We have around 45% international speakers with us. We have around 30% women speakers, and we have around 30% international delegates who are viewing us live for the largest virtual global fintech fest today, which is organized by FinTech Convergence Council of IMEI and NPCI. This conference is presented by Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and Reserve Bank of India, and powered by Amazon Pay and brought to you by WhatsApp and Google Pay. I would like to start by inviting our esteemed moderator and an expert in this area, Mr. G. Padmanabhan, Non-Executive Chairman, Bank of India. Welcome, sir. Mr. S. Ganesh Kumar, former Executive Director, Reserve Bank of India. Mr. Mani Mamalan, Founder, Chairman, and MD, Electronic Payments and Services. Mr. Rishi Gupta, Managing Director and CEO, Fino Payments and Services. Mr. Srinivasu MN, Co-founder and Director, BillDesk, for a panel discussion on digitization journey so far and post-COVID challenge. Dear delegates, it's a rare opportunity that you get such a great expert panel for whom you can ask questions. Please keep the questions pouring to us. Without any further ado, may I request Padmanabhan sir to take this forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Latika. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be moderating a group as erudite as this. The relationship between me and Ganesh Kumar goes many decades, and Mani, Srinivas, and Rishi, I think we have been interacting quite frequently while I was in Reserve Bank and after that as well. So it's great to be a part of this panel. And let me start by making a few remarks that as far as this country, India is concerned, I think we are in a very peculiar position as far as our digital journey is concerned. We have achieved quite a lot for any country, the kind of increases that we are having in terms of digital adoption. I think any country would be happy about, but nobody seems to be really happy given the kind of possibilities that are before us. So it's not sort of decrying what we have already achieved, but yesterday in the inaugural session, even the Chief General Manager in charge of payments in Reserve Bank ended up his talk by saying that, quoting Robert Frost, saying that we have many miles to go to achieve what we set out to achieve as far as the digital journey is concerned. One of the things which have heartened quite a few of us who have been closely associated with this area is that during the last 2 months, I think the digital transactions have finally started outstripping the cash transaction. So the question is, has India already arrived? Now, whenever we ask this question, I think there are a couple of definitive events which get linked to this achievement. One was what we thought through and implemented, and the other was which came on us unwelcome, unannounced. And I'm referring to in the first issue that I'm referring to is that where the country took massive demonetization, and the second is the imposition on us by the COVID. And both this, in a way, have contributed to the spurt in digital transaction. Now, combine that with the new developments that are keeping happening. UPI, for instance, has been a complete game changer. And from being few millions of transactions few years ago, I mean, maybe a couple of 2-3 years ago, we are talking about this touching 1 billion last month, more than 1 billion. And our aim is to have 1 billion every day. Now, the question that is before us is that how have we reached here? It'll be interesting before we start discussing about the nuances. How did India reach there? Are these two events which led us to where we are today, or has this been a much larger journey or much thought through journey? I think I would probably start with Ganesh, who has been associated with this area for a long time in the Reserve Bank. To take us through the journey that India has gone through, how this was planned out of the Reserve Bank of India. Because one question that we always keep asking as far as India is concerned is, is digitization in India demand driven or supply driven? And sometimes somebody comes up and say that it's neither demand driven or supply driven, it is regulator driven. So who better than a formal regulator to probably take us through this journey? Ganesh.
Thank you. Nice to actually start off on this note. I will try to be at this point of time a little anecdotal and then go on to more theoretical positions. 3 decades ago, or a little more than 3 decades ago, when the actual payment system journey, those days we never called them payment systems, started in the Reserve Bank. Actually, what Mr. Padmanabhan said was very right. It was a blend. It was not demand driven, it was not supply driven, but more regulator driven. Unlike many other central banks worldwide, where they have specific roles like being a monetary authority or things of that kind, the Reserve Bank of India is actually a full-fledged central bank, has multiple hats that it wears. As part of its developmental role, in the late 80s, one of the things that it took on itself was to, at those times, the people will laugh at it now, but then at that point of time was to mechanize the check clearing system in the country. Mr. Padmanabhan is aware about the type of clearing houses that we had those days, where might used to be right and whatever Darwin's theory was in terms of survival of the fittest used to work. And most often than not, it was a rule of the jungle which used to prevail. There was no certainty about when people could actually get realization of their checks, meaning that the check which is presented by somebody gets the money in his account. I made a mention about checks because that was the only, or why only, that was the most predominant type of clearing or a payment instrument those days. India had actually the fortune of having the first predatory payment instrument, maybe 700 or 800 years earlier, in the form of what we used to call as a checks. Since Mr. Padmanabhan made the mention about what the CGM of DPS has made yesterday about the volumes, I remember that when we moved over to mechanized check clearing using MICR technology, something which I could never believe that a machine could read a check, unimaginable those days. The volume that we used to process on a day throughout the country was around 1 million. Typically, the 4 major metro cities contributed to 80% in terms of the Pareto rule, and the rest of the country had 20%. Clearing these checks used to take an entire day. India, unlike many of the countries, had what was called as a return clearing, took another 1 or 2 days. So finally, people who used to get checks realized in 15 days, 30 days, could actually give a sigh of relief when they used to get their checks realized within 2 days. The Reserve Bank took upon itself saying that this needs to be reduced. There need to be substantial improvement in that. And from that journey, it started off. We were actually laggards in the payment system scenario in the late 80s of the previous century. But fast forward to the mid 90s, when we started, as Mani was telling a little earlier, the electronic payment systems, something which one didn't think about those days. It was not purely electronic. There was some amount of paper and some amount, it was a hybrid system. But there again, it was a Reserve Bank driven electronic payment system. We used to call it an electronic clearing service with a debit clearing, credit clearing. All that is now history. Move over towards actually digital payments. So one of the things that the Reserve Bank did was, to realizing that this is going to be the potential, set up exclusivity within the Reserve Bank to handle payment systems. And that thus was formed actually the conglomerate unit to take care of payment systems, which Mr. Padmanabhan had the honor of actually leading when he was there at that point of time. Another epoch-making initiative of the Reserve Bank was facilitating in setting up of the National Payments Council of India, one of its kind, and a technology institute called the IDRBT, which did a lot of research in technology for payment systems, including mobiles, and that is how back-to-back vertical integration resulted in payment systems getting importance. This was actually backed by a high-level board-driven vision, which the Reserve Bank started off from the mid of the first decade of 2000s, a vision for payment systems. I still remember the first vision had safety, security, efficiency, all the S's and the E's which you can think of. So there was, and one of the reasons why it was regulator driven was because of the nature of the banks in the country, and the Reserve Bank and India adopted a bank driven approach at that point of time. It's still largely bank driven, but there's a lot of non-bank participation as well today. It was because the character of the banks was mostly public sector or government owned and look up to the regulator for any new initiative. So that is how it started. But then somewhere from the last decade, 2009-10 onwards, there's been a large participation by the non-banks and the private sector as well. The regulator has more become, instead of being a regulator, look at it from a risk manager perspective, take care of the big picture and allow innovation to take care, allow new developments to actually do. Mr. Padmanabhan made a mention about the Unified Payment Interface, or UPI. I still remember that when I used to attend the meetings in the Bank for International Settlements, the people used to ask, how did you do this? What is the secret? The secret was nothing. Allow people to do what they want, but ensure that there are limits, there are parameters under which they do the risk management. So that was one. And the second is the advantage that we had in terms of the IT development that we had, being a leader in the IT implementation. There were a lot of initiatives which the IT sector readily gave to the payment scenario, including from large companies. Many evangelists came in. All these things put together gave us this bouquet of payment offerings that we have today. So when, as Mr. Padmanabhan indicated, there was a shock which was put on the payment systems in the form of demonetization, people thought that it will be a big break which will happen to the normal citizen. We also found that the average Indian could very easily take over to QR payments. People didn't know what QR was. Most of the people didn't have mobiles with cameras, but still QR took on a very large scale. I think perhaps for the first time, the volumes anywhere in the world it happened. But unfortunately, following the remonetization and the currency notes coming back into circulation, the volumes came down. Then the recent COVID, which has taken, leads me to guess that digitization is here to stay. Just like most of us are comfortable working from home, I'm sure that a lot of digitization will happen. So one of the things I'll end up now with just saying that in this entire journey, the most important thing that has been taken into account is the risk that is there. Minimum risk for the user, minimum risk for the participant, minimum risk for the service provider, and the settlement entity as well, and club it with the absolute safety and security to the extent that is possible. It's been a good journey, and I'm sure, as Vasudevan said yesterday, there are still miles to go, and I'm sure we'll be achieve them in this group-based manner that we have.
Very much. That is a very quick brush, kind of taking us through whatever has happened. So while the digitization, demonetization, and COVID did help the people who were sort of sitting on the wall, wanting to go either side to move towards digital, because for some time anything else was not possible. That helped this push, but it was not as if like Rip Van Winkle, you went to sleep and then woke up the next day after demonetization of COVID, find everything is digital. It was a well thought through journey. I think that leads me to the issue that while in the West, when we are talking about fintechs and digitization, I think most of the efforts have been towards improving customer experience and customer service. India had an important aim in adopting technology as far as the financial sector is concerned, which is a financial inclusion. I think given the length and breadth of the country, this included financial sector was something which was so very important for the Indian system that once the technology came in, particularly the mobile technology, the government and the regulators saw that as a big opportunity to harness this technology to drive financial inclusion. For a long time, the regulator and the Reserve Bank thought that the financial inclusion has to happen in a particular manner. One should have an insurance, one should have a deposit, one should have a credit, all these kind of things. But what technology enabled was, it was possible to start off unbundling and then bundling together rather than always think in terms of bundling. So probably I think the how this technology, or what we call the jam trinity as far as the rest of the world is concerned, enable this financial inclusion This is a journey. Probably it will be good to hear from Rishi, who heads a payment bank, and I think is the best position to explain to us that. Rishi.
Thank you, sir. The financial inclusion story is not a new story. Financial inclusion started with 2006 when RBI came out with the BC guidelines. But I think the technology has played a very, very big role in making this entire financial inclusion possible. Initially, when the financial inclusion story started, it was more on smart card base, where we used to capture the data on the smart and issue it to the customer. Entire equation changed first when the Aadhaar system came in 2009, 2010. So when we went to the market and we saw identity was one of the biggest crises which people were having. People did not have identity. And we are talking about people who are in the lower middle of the pyramid, people who who are not part of any credit bureaus or any other banking ecosystem. So the biggest issue with them was they were missing the identity piece. I think when Aadhaar came in 2009, 2010, the identity problem started to get 1.25 billion people plus have identity which is captured digitally. And I think Aadhaar has been a beautiful system in terms of a verifiable identity system. I think that's the only system in the country which is a verifiable identity system. We have other systems like passport and ration cards, driving license, which are not verifiable per se. So, and then Aadhaar opened it up to KYC and eKYC, and that changed the entire way the banking ecosystem actually developed. So I would say a lot of credit of what we see today is because of the Aadhaar ecosystem which got created, and the government opened it up for financial transactions. If we would have left it only for a normal identity verification, the usage of Aadhaar would not have been to the level it is today. The second is the financial inclusion account which got opened starting from 2008, 2009, got a further stimulus through the Jan Dhan accounts. Around 40 to 45 crore accounts got opened in the matter of 4-5 years. And those accounts started to have money in the bank account. Still around 2015 or so, the accounts used to be there, but the balances were very, very minuscule. But now with Jan Dhan becoming more active, debit cards getting issued under Jan Dhan accounts, Aadhaar getting captured, Aadhaar getting linked to the Jan Dhan account was one of the big things. I remember initially the linkage of Aadhaar to the accounts were abysmal 20-30%. But over the years now, I think the linkage of Jan Dhan with Aadhaar is reached about 70 to 80% as such. And then the third is the mobile revolution, which came around with nearly 1 billion people having mobile phones and plus. So those entire three ecosystem, which we call Jam Trinity, actually made it possible for large section of the population of the country to get money. Imagine a situation if COVID would have happened 20 years, 10 years back also, we would have been a very different system. Currently, that kind of technology which we had 10, 15 years back. So a lot of technology advancement which has happened over the last 10 years, starting from Aadhaar, Jan Dhan, mobile, actually helped it to make it possible. The entire ecosystem around Aadhaar enabled payment system, the micro ATM payment system has actually made it possible for people to withdraw money from at the comfort of walking about 100, 200 meters from their home. So in the COVID situation where branches were running at 20-30% capacities, ATMs were not getting filled up with the cash, the entire disbursement of government 30,000 crore rupees on Jan Dhan accounts, plus more disbursement on Ujjwala and other DBT schemes did not get hampered at all, and they were running very smoothly. So this is all technology which has got enabled. I think going forward, in terms of your question, in terms of what more we need to do, in terms of to make this entire system more robust, I think a large part of the digital transactions or the payments are on the smart card only, smartphones only. So if we can build up some applications which can run on feature phones and no phones. Feature phones, there are some applications which are available through UPI and USSD, and government has been trying, regulator has been trying to enable, because 700-800 million people of the country are still using feature phones and not smartphones. So if we can develop some applications which can run on feature phones and no phones, I think we can capture a large section of the population. I think another piece which is important is as people move from a physical to a digital ecosystem, the experience is very, very important for that particular customer. So a lot of work which fintechs have really done is around convenience, and the banks have done is on account of risk and simplicity, which is there. So the idea of we can merge the fintech and the banks together and build up an ecosystem where the risk as well as the simplicity and convenience is captured very effectively, so that the first experience of a customer is very good. He doesn't go back losing money by doing the digital transaction. I think that is a second big element which needs to be looked at. And the third, I think, is on financial literacy and independence, which is there. So those are the three broad areas I would say if we want to bring the mass market into banking. And thanks to technology, it is possible today.
Rishi, just before I move on, I just want to ask this question. I think you are what you stated about the need to expand this usage to beyond smartphones. I think this was a point flagged both by Nandan and by Dilip yesterday in their conversation, because basically smartphones, feature phones, and no phones. I think people should be able to. I think Nandan did make a mention about an account aggregator model they are developing, and that making a big change as far as the credit availability is concerned. Now, I hope you have been listening. Do you see that as a big opportunity as far as your bank is concerned?
So, as a payments bank, we cannot do credit right now. But as we move into a small finance bank, I think account aggregator as well as the OECD, which is the OECN, which was the new platform which is getting created. I think both of them will be a game changer from place point of view, as well as from the experience point of view, as well as the individuals getting the data of their own system. So now they are restricted because their information is sitting in multiple systems. Don't have an aggregation of information. So imagine a situation where we have an account aggregator kind of a solution where all the data from multiple banks and multiple entities are sitting in one place, and social data of a customer is sitting in one place. So if we are able to build up a good database of systems where the account aggregation as well as the social aggregation is pulled together, I think we can bring a large part of the country into formal credit system. I think one problem which we still need to find an answer is while on payment side, and I've been hearing you, sir, and some of the other panel members since yesterday. I think payments problem we have solved to a large extent as far as the top 500 million people of the country is concerned. They use it or not, that is their own decision, but problem has been solved. So one problem which we need to work is the bottom 500, 600 million people and the ubiquity of the credit ecosystem which can be created. So I think these are the two big issues which the fintechs, I think, will have to work on.
Okay, thank you. I think Mani and Vasu, I come to you. In long-standing practitioners in Indian fintech space, very successful ones too. Now, you are perhaps best positioned to tell us, whenever we talk about this digital journey, I think nobody stops saying that we have achieved a lot. Everybody talks about miles to go. Everybody compares ourselves with China, what they have achieved, what we have not been able to achieve. Now, if I push you to tell us what have we done right and what we have not done right? What did China do which we did not do? Was it early adoption? Was it something else? In fact, as Mani speaks, let me pick up a question which has come from on the chat. Mani has been specifically asked to comment. Where does he see the ATM industry, which he was associated with right at the beginning, as we go forward? So probably Mani first, followed by Vasu. You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. And to answer your first question, I think somebody wanted to know, where does the ATM industry go? And I continue to believe, I think ATM will coexist with whatever has happened. In fact, I think it's now while we started way back in the 90s with hardly 45 machines, and today we have 200,000 machines plus. Of course, basically the growth of ATM percentage used to be about 15 to 19%. Now it has basically just come down less than 10%. So the replacements are taking place, but ATMs will continue to be there because Rishi was saying about 500 million people. There's another 500 million people who still continue to be not digital. So they will continue to use it. So ATM growth will basically not be as it used to be. It will basically stay as it is, but they will not die. That's my take on ATM industry. Coming back to the second question, as well as what did we do right? I think all of you said that. We did everything right. I don't think so we have any complaint. We would have not been able to take care of the post demonetization, post COVID today, sitting pretty at home, actually still feeding ourselves belly full because of all the digital payments technology that has been put in place, either by the regulator, as you rightly saw, or by the demand or the supply, whatever it is, but it is there. I believe that the regulator has a larger role to play, as Ganesh was saying, but for them, the initiation of technology or basically processes not been there. I think to that extent, I think this, thanks to Mr. Padmanabhan, of course, Ganesh Kumar and their associates from this. I have started my career from clearinghouse, where it started, MICR to the payments. So I knew exactly the evolution of payments in this country. Couple of things which I think I won't compare ourselves with China, XYZ, because the two different basically just mechanism of regulations and governance. So it is going to be very difficult for us to compare ourselves with China. But having said that, I think we have lot many things to do ourselves. What is that we have done everything right? Consumer is happy, convenience is there, customer experience has been great, and there are fintech companies doing well, like payments banks are doing well, we are doing well, everyone is doing well. But what will be missing is the one that is going to be what we call, as a banker, I was a banker, it's called the reconciliation issues. I don't want to take those names of banks. There are a huge number of banks in the country which possibly still have not reconciled the books for over 10 years, 15 years, which is going to be a concern for us. Any banking system or an accounting philosophy has to have a reconciliation process well fed and systematic. With the risk is there ahead. Most of the banks have not taken that part of it. To see that if you don't put the house in order, the back office, the front office doesn't look basically doesn't always bad. When it hits us, it will hit the bottom. You hit the bottom of the economy, everybody. And these situations like with COVID, the transactions are booming, everything is good, all of us are happy. At the same time, I think we need to have the fundamentals of the processes and the related reconciliation issues, which is a major issue I possibly believe. Without that, I think the disputes, chargeback, related issues, which is happening, whatever it is today, customer. In fact, I think let me tell you example of it. I do a basically transaction today in any of the channels on e-commerce. If I don't get an answer, order cancelled, I get my payment after 7-8 days. It should not be the case. Actually, is when they get the money in advance, everything is done. I think these are all primarily because of the related reconciliation issues of the back end. I think these are the things which have to be taken care for a better customer experience. That is the only thing I would possibly say as a concern. Otherwise, we are the best. And I keep saying, in 10 years before, I wrote an article in Economic Times said it will be T plus 1, no settlement. It won't be T plus 1 settlement or reconciliation. It will be T plus 0. There will be instant payments happening in this country, which happened after this we spoke, and it is all real time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mani. I think Vasu, probably, I think one of the things that we pushed right from the beginning from the Reserve Bank of India was that anything in this country to do with payments will have to be interoperable. Now, it'll have to be an aggregation. I think you played your role excellently as far as that vertical is concerned. Maybe your thoughts would be very interesting.
Thank you, sir. What I'm going to do, given Mr. Ganesh Kumar, Mani and Rishi have articulated at a broad brush level on various aspects, I'll leave those aspects and focus more specifically on some narrow issues of what I think have actually helped. The way I look at it, the digital payments journey for India is about roughly 2 decades old, beginning somewhere in early 2000. And in these 20 years, I look at the journey as being broadly 2 buckets, the first 10, 12, 13 years and the last 6, 7 years. The one common theme I would to top of mind that I would highlight is the biggest driver in a marketplace sense for digital payments have been non-banks. This is counterintuitive in the sense that non-banks as a segment have come into visibility only recently. But structurally, if I look back at 20 years, I'll break it down and say the biggest driver has been non-banks. And how have they contributed? In my mind, if I just take the first 10, 12-year journey, non-banks got it right by timing of entry into the market, of entering into digital payments in India in 2000 when the world hadn't woken up to digital payments. I think that was the first right step that many of the non-banks did. The second thing they got very right was the model of partnering with banks. End of the day, any digital transaction about debiting or crediting an account, whether it's a bank account or a credit card account. What the initial players got right was the fact that you need to collaborate with banks. And that helped India evolve models even whether on a bilateral basis, how do you get a digital transaction going. This helped create a right business model that sustains even till date. So to me, the first part of the journey, which is figuring out early by non-banks how to make work with the bank's infrastructure, was a very key part. Key because banks were caught up at that point trying to move from the branch-based to core banking system. And as they were figuring their internal how to rejig the product, the non-banks carried this story forward. So between the period 2000 to 2005 and 6, as banks focused on internal technologies, the non-banks took it to the marketplace and created early awareness among customers. There's an aspect to that, which I speak for non-banks in that sense. I think the initial set of players were very disciplined lot. And where it translated to, I'll cover that a bit later, I think it helped the regulator take a light touch view of regulation. So without taking away anything from regulators' vision on the marketplace, I think it was helped by the fact that they saw a fair bit of discipline play, and they believed a light touch regulation would help. I'll speak on that later, but the second part I think that worked very well for Indian digital payments was the initial set of merchants, the merchant enablement that happened. If you look at US or Europe, typically digital payments got driven by the e-commerce segment, the small merchants, people who could sell goods. India's story was completely the reverse. India's story started digital payments being enabled by the traditional merchants, as we call them, the telco, the utility, the government tax payments, the insurance companies. And this didn't happen easily. It's a credit to the entire ecosystem, whether it's the non-banks, banks, or the merchants, that they all work very collaboratively with each other too, and work deeply, made deep investments to make sure those sort of payments could come online. It served a couple of things, to my mind, advantages-wise. It inculcated a deep habit among the people who are making digital payments to make those necessary, what I call it, the non-discretionary payments. Second, it helped focus with the merchants on building the right processes at their end for reconciliation of this payment. The point that money alluded to in the banking context, in the merchant context, when the traditional merchants went live as the utility telco, there was no such great urgency. The world wasn't running away any place. So people took their time to implement it, but they got some of these processes right. And to that extent, they also kind of educated customers the right way. All this, I think, contributed in a big manner to the initial stage. And the testimony to that is even today, whether we talk of non-banks, wallets, prepaid to UPI, the majority payments that still happen in the country from a third-party perspective are those still to the traditional merchant, not to the e-commerce merchant, and not like in other markets. The third part I think we got right, which I would allude to earlier, I think was the regulation. I'll briefly talk of it in 2-3 places. I think Mr. Ganesh Kumar spoke of the vision, obviously that found articulation over many years. But if I just pick a couple of elements from it, from my recall of it, the first set of the very early interventions or guidances from the regulator from a non-bank perspective, leaving aside banking, came on early mobile banking, prepaid cards, a little bit of inclusion. But to me, strictly speaking, the 2009 guidelines for intermediary, I genuinely hold that as being a very outstanding piece of regulatory work, not just from just an RBI perspective, but across regulators. The reason I say that was, one, it was very pithy, right? To the point, focused on the core objective by looking at the market to say, if digital payment have to grow, it's being grown on the back of non-banks and innovative play, what is the core interest that the financial regulator needs to protect? That piece of regulation did not get into process and multiple other issues. It was very, if I remember, a pithy 3-page document focused on the right part. And again, a testimony to that is 10 years later, it is still as valid and structurally still needs no improvement unless we choose to bring to it. It just stood the test of time. So I think of that as a very outstanding piece that helped the market. Helped the market in multiple ways, brought in the discipline of saying money is sacred, customer money needs to be dealt with in a certain manner. Regulator gave the right approach, saying it's a light touch. As long as the market behaves, this is where it will stay. And it stood the test of time, right? I think these are 2-3 things that we got right, what I call the first phase.
Yeah, Vasu, but I think all of us let me just speed up because we have 2-3 other questions. So can you quickly tell us, all of us are happy about what we got right. What we did not get right? Just 2 quick points.
I think 2 parts. One, briefly alluded to in earlier, I think we've not been able to protect enough value of the value chain for domestic play. If I just take a simple point of UPI, 90% of transactions are done by 3 or 4 players, which is not the Indian banks. Ideally, India should have leadership. The value is captured within the banking system, because that's where the deep investment take place. Second thing that I don't think has happened very well is deep investment into the core infrastructure, which I think leads to what I call the trust deficit in the end-to-end payment thing. With 2 other points, not enough in terms of customer education. And if I specifically pick on points I think will go on to impact in the future, I think it's not enough process improvement at banks' end, which will help them cater to the billion transactions a day going forward. I think that's where we might see a shock.
Very critical. I think it's very important. The infrastructure part is quite critical. I think, thank you. And Ganesh, thank you for waiting patiently. Let me come back to you. Now, I go a little futuristic, bit of crystal ball. Where do you see India going in this digital journey? Now, do we talk about more innovation? Then if you talk about innovation, does it go along with more regulation? Or if I talk about more innovation, regulation in the same breath, would you accuse me of being oxymoronic? It cannot exist. Now, can innovation speed up on account of sandboxes alone? Or would it also need to be supported with a light touch or a principle-based regulation? Because it takes time for an innovation to become a product. So when you need to intervene becomes critical. Maybe initial thoughts from Ganesh, and if Vasu wants to add something very quickly, you please add. But I would request now each of us to keep our answers within a minute or so, because we have a couple of other questions to discuss before we end up. Yeah. Ganesh.
Very pertinent point. In fact, I would actually, if I were to do the crystal ball gazing, as you said, would actually think that it is going to be principle-based regulation that is going to be the way ahead. Already it has started in certain areas, some of which is being seen, some of which is not being seen. Well, I will leave that to the regulator to actually come out and tell, but it's going to be principle-based regulation. Also juxtaposed by the need to have innovation going on its own. Now, I would actually draw comfort from the fact that UPI came in as if it were a bolt from the blue. There was not much of the so-called sandbox testing at that point of time when UPI came in. But UPI stood the test of time. Not only has it withstood the test of time, to answer Vasu's point, it's been able to scale up to levels which possibly have not been seen anywhere else in the world. So yes, infrastructural development has to take place. Just a small piece of information, the regulator has also promised some amount of funding for infrastructure development, basically physical infrastructure, but then I see the growth of digitization is not going to require that type of infrastructure. There's a need to be changed. So my gut feeling would be, it will be more principle-based regulation, more self-regulation as well. So entities like PCI and PCI will have to do more self-regulation. And the regulator will not possibly hesitate to take strict action in case somebody is doing something which is detrimental to the interest of the payment system. Otherwise, it will be allowing lotuses to bloom the way they want. And as long as the blossoming helps everybody, it should work. This is what I think will happen. And if this happens, the pride of place that India has today in leading the world in retail payment systems, I'm sure that will continue, because with the population that we have, with the type of devices that we have, and the number of JAM accounts that are in the country, there is potential for huge number of transactions digitally. And I think that's what is going to be the future.
Thank you very much. Vasu, you want to add on 30 seconds?
Yes, very quickly. I think from a regulation perspective, I think what is needed is the bar for participation needs to rise a little bit. Because innovation can be done by individuals too, right? And therefore, the right bar needs to be established. Second quick point to make with respect to the future, and I think, again, just from a bank's perspective, I think payments is the bank's game to lose from here if they don't do 3-4 things. Investing into core technology infrastructure from a payments perspective, willing to pay up for innovation, investing into customer engagement, and investing enough into data analytics.
Thank you. Very interesting. In fact, that basically leads me to the next question automatically. I think there has been a lot of debate once the so-called fintechs came. There are people who prefer to call them as tech fins rather than fintechs. But anyway, these fintechs banks, is the future path collaboration, competition, disruption? All sorts of questions are being asked. I think in one of the earlier sessions, the former chairperson of State Bank of India, Arundhati, made a very interesting point. since bank deal with money, the trust is important. So the banks which have been there for quite some time, the trust becomes very critical. But the future is not on trust alone, the trust and the ability for you to turn around. So there needs to be probably a collaborative path, and it becomes more relevant in a post-COVID era, because there are as we speak today, I don't think any of the rules written for normal situations, whether it is for the fintech, whether it's for the banks, whether it's for the financial sector, whether it's for the capital adequacy, none of them exist. To me, all that have been thrown out of the window by this COVID. Now, where do you see this journey going? And particularly, how do you see the adoption of new technologies? For instance, distributed ledger technology or an artificial intelligence and a machine learning playing very critical roles. Maybe I will again start with money, then move to Rishi, then Vasu. But please keep your comments within a minute or so. Please go ahead. Money, you got to unmute, please.
Of course, I think we need basically data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning. The way forward is these are all given. If you like it, you don't like it. All that we want is whether we need to have a digitized currency or a cryptocurrency, or we want to have the model of basically banks becoming responsible more than what basically the private players are, or bank and the regulator are basically just willing to support these initiatives. As far as we see, I think is from my perspective, the future is when possibly we will have these trading currencies or basically just digital units of payments will be traded among many of the entities among themselves. Possibly you have X currency or X unit of basically payment from one basically just a guy to another guy, maybe a bank affiliated, not bank affiliated. They will have to have this basically just learning, saying they possibly will trade against one against other. One unit of X will be 1 point something of others. And maybe tomorrow Geo unit is different from the Airtel unit or Payments Bank unit. You don't know, I think. The future is going to be traded on currencies within the ecosystem of, even if we call it as a rupee itself. I think that is going to be the future for me.
Interesting. Rishi.
Sir, I'm at least on this bank, I'm very, very clear in terms of it has to be more of a collaborative approach. The entire concept of open banking is based on this concept of banks having the trust and the safety and ability to take risks, whereas the fintechs having the ability on agility and to scale. So I'm very clear in terms of it has to be a more collaborative world rather than a bank world or a fintech world. We are in the world 3, where both banks and fintechs have to work together, both on the demand side as well as on the supply side, both in terms of systems, processes, and we have talked about that in the panel discussion as well as on the front end. And we are seeing some of the big banks, everybody working. The UPI is a big example of that collaborative approach which is being there. So as in Fino also, in Fino Payments Bank also, we are tied up with many fintech partners on multiple aspects on both in demand and supply side.
Thank you very much. Srini, quick word before I move to the last question. Yeah.
I'll just focus only on the bank non-bank cooperation. I think historically that's how we've grown. But in a post-COVID era, I would look out for 2 things. One, globally, many countries will evolve policies keeping COVID kind of situations in mind, and therefore we'll see what policies come out in terms of nationalist protectionist measures. Second, India already has very large global players competing. And while banks and all non-banks will cooperate, I think it will be a period of little uneasy cooperation over the next couple of years. Given the size and capital ability of the global players, there'll always be the tension that they can tread on toes. So it'll be a bit of uneasy cooperation.
But we'll still survive. Okay. Come back to Ganesh. Last question. Regulator, central bank, lender are the last resort. So the speaker for the last question. Where do you see India going? Do you see a crypto, or is it going to be a cryptic no?
I would actually try to have it somewhere in between, because I don't think it will be a cryptic no at this point of time. But at the same time, I'm not too sure whether the crypto is going to come within the timeline that some of the people are expecting. My gut feeling is there will be experiments, there will be actually small pilots which will be done. It all depends on the success of how these go. And if these go very well, then I think it'll go. But to me, it appears that crypto to take over physical currency is pretty much going to be similar, like checks going to be completely away from the payment scenario. It's going to take a long time.
A follow-up question. Do you think that the China coming out with a central bank digital currency is a game-changing moment, or is it just going to fade away?
It will be a game-changing moment, and I think there are actually 3 or 4 other countries as well who are trying to work out pilots. Everybody is trying to see who's the first so that he can learn from the others. My gut feeling, and again, I don't know whether that will really happen that way, is that at some point of time, I'm sure India will also take the plunge. We may, as I said, not do 100% complete crypto-based economic settlement chain, but maybe on a small pilot, and depending on how it goes, and I have no reason to doubt that it will not go very well, I think that may sow the seeds for the future. And then we can, at that point of time, give a goodbye to dirty currency notes and things of that kind, provided all this works, if we have enough bandwidth, if there is enough capability for everybody in the nooks and corners of the country to access the digital ledger technology using strong and stable communication links. And I'm sure banks will come up to the level, and the private sectors will also try to complement one another.
Thank you very much. There is just one question in this thing, whether behavioral biometrics can be made a part of second factor of authentication. I think let me clarify that Reserve Bank has not said what should be a second factor, not second factor. So this is too granular a question to be taken up by this panel. Just be assured that Reserve Bank has just said two-factor authentication, but they have never specified what can be the second factor and what cannot be. I need to thank my panelists. Thank you very much. It has been excellent. I think your varied views, I'm sure that the participants would find useful. And let me thank the Global FinTech Festival for giving us this opportunity. Thank you very much. Back to the host.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks once again. I could just echo words of Padmanabhan sir. It's been a great panel and so much learning. It never stops. Stay tuned, everyone. We're going to be back for the next session. Thanks to our sponsors, NPCI, Amazon Pay, WhatsApp, and Google. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, the panelists.